The Fantasy Fullback Dive is thrilled to welcome on for the first time Bob Harris at Football Diehard on Twitter, the senior editor of one of the OG fantasy sites, Football Diehards. You can find them at FF Diehards on Twitter or footballdiehards.com. He's also on SiriusXM Fantasy, a host on Channel 87, up at least where I'm at, and he is a Fantasy Hall of Fame, Writers Associating Hall of Fame member, the first ever winner of the Writer of the Year award. Suffice to say, this is a wolf through and through to his core. It's such a pleasure to have you on, Bob. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. It was great to win the first one because I think Brad Evans now wins them all. No, Brad Evans or Gary Davenport ever since. I don't know.
They certainly have blazed their own path into the industry, and I'm hoping to have some of those guys on too. But man, I was telling you right as we hopped on here, you're one of the first guys I've ever read, like literally the guy that kind of turned my eyes on to the fact that there can be people out there analyzing fantasy football. I always loved playing it with my high school buddies. We would always kind of get the magazines, go to the beach, and the diehards. You always had like the structured release of schedules, so I felt like I had this huge edge back in the day before the internet was all over the place. You guys would always have these new releases in August and things, and I would get the updated ones where they're all in like the June old cheat sheets, and you guys always just crushed it. So it's just kind of surreal talking to you. Thanks so much again for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Wolf. And that was some of the, one of the things about the magazines, and we're doing a limited set this year, two titles, the Pro Forecast, which is the 31st edition of that one, and the Football Diehards. But figuring out the thing you said, you sell a magazine and it's a snapshot in time, and how do you how do you fix that? Well, the internet is how you fix that, and
Exactly.
your rankings updated, and you kind of give that along. But I think those are kind of realizing, being part of the audience, knowing what people are interested in has made this all work.
Absolutely, yes. And I'd love to ask you, just as I kind of ask all the Wolves, and this is going to be interesting because I don't necessarily consider you anything other than a trailblazer in the industry here. I always kind of ask, what's your path to this game? But I feel like you almost blazed the path for so many of me, and other people who have been on the show before. So kind of what was your way, blazing this trail or getting into the fantasy industry? And what's some advice after being in it for as long as you have that you'd have for anybody else looking to break into the space?
So yeah, this is like my 28th. I've been doing this a long time. This is about my 28th year. But so like in 1986, I started playing fantasy football. Friend brought it from I lived in Tucson. Friend brought it back from San Diego. Was walked in the door upon his return from a job, said, "I found this thing, and you're going to love it." And of course we did. So we started playing, and it took me about a week to realize that, I don't have enough information to do this right. And so that was 86. So I think in 1993, I started a business providing that information, and it's kind of rolled out from there. And, early on, I was a graphic designer, so I kind of did print stuff. And so I actually printed something every week and mailed it out and got it out in time. And then we added a fax component to that, which is kind of the precursor to the internet. Was like every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I would send out a fax with who practiced and who didn't. And that got really popular. Then it went to like 900 numbers, which were, kept me alive for a few years. And so just kind of rolling through and hanging on. It was, a niche business. USA Today had some, interesting, because everyone got their information from USA Today, right? Every box score, that's how you scored your teams back then. And so I advertised at USA Today, and that kind of, helped me catch on. And then over the course of time, it took a few years. The NFL finally realized, oh, wow, this is probably good for us and not actually gambling or something horrible that we think it is. And that was the big difference maker when the NFL and the internet and the NFL were the two game changers to the whole thing and made this a hell of a lot easier, and I was sitting there, spending everything I made, printing things out and stuffing them in envelopes and mailing them. One of my customers called, I think the second year I was doing it, said, "Hey, you ever heard of the World Wide Web?" And I said, and he told me, I said, "So you're telling me I can send a million of these for the same price I can send one?" Yes. And so I got all in on that. And so that's kind of been it, and got involved in the magazines pretty early on. I think it was like right in 93. Emil Cadlick, my publisher, had been doing it since like 89. And, obviously called me, wanted advertising, and we started working together more. And then it was 96, I started working for them a lot, and then 98 it went full time with them. So there you have it.
It's incredible to you hear all the stories about people who used to box score enough, but you were sending out faxes, and it's just like the evolution. Right. It must be so cool to just see.
The thing that made me the most money was a 900 number where like everyone had to wait till the next day to get the box scores. Mm-hmm. Well, I was on CompuServe or whatever, and the Associated Press put the box scores out, and I would just read every box score into my 900 number, and people would call that thing and spend money to sit on it for 15 minutes while I read through all the box scores as fast as I could. So, those were the days, my friend.
It's incredible. I remember I used to think I had it. Like, I remember we used to have Stat Tracker was like when I was first starting to get in, and you'd watch the arrows and stuff. And now we have, Red Zone. You see every play. It's crazy how far the game has come along, which is amazing.
I think a lot of the technology that we enjoy and the things we follow, just as football fans were developed, in part because of the intense interest of fantasy owners. They kind of 100%. Drove the technology on that.
Absolutely, yes. And just to preview what we're going to get into for the feature of this segment, we're going to be talking about busts, or not necessarily busts, but ADP avoids, people we think are overpriced as we get there. But again, I just love when I get the chance to speak to Wolves, especially someone who's been in the game as long as Bob. I always like to pick their brain before we get into the feature. And part of what I always also like to ask is, what's kind of your process? Has it changed, 26 years later? Have you always kind of stayed to the same core preparation, or what do you do kind of year to year?
It's kind of accelerated, obviously. It used to be there was an off season, and the off season was the time I became more knowledgeable than everyone else, because all the information out there that's widely available to everybody. And it's kind of funny, can go back to, I mentioned Emil Kadlick. He also started high-stakes fantasy football along with Lenny Capano, the World Championship of Fantasy Football. I went to their first event, and there was a guy standing in line holding one of our magazines. And I said, are you going to use those rankings? He goes, oh, hell no, I do better rankings than this. And that's what you realize is everybody do your job, right? And that's gone to a new level just based on the technology. Look, anybody on Twitter, anybody anywhere, anybody on my website now, you have to push this information out. So information we used to collect up over the off season and dissect and use to our advantage as, quote unquote experts, right? That's there for everybody. So it's available to everybody. So now the process moves into assessing the information more than, hoarding and delivering the information, to assessing the information and trying to do a better job. So that's kind of been the evolution was, early on, it was a chore to get the information. I mentioned, I had the phones and stuff. We would, early on, like fantasy owners would call teams, individual media relations departments of teams. And one of the things I did pretty early on was I called all the teams, said, hey, look, I know you're getting a lot of calls. Give them my phone number and give me the information. And I'll help them and I'll try to sell them something, but I'll give them the answer so they don't keep calling you. So, fantasy owners are always out there digging for that information. And so now it's widely available. Now the shore is making it easier for them to access and understand the information and put it, in an organized way, because there's so much of it out there, right, Wolf? It's literally, Twitter is like sticking the fire hose down your mouth and turning it on full. You could be injured easily. So that's a big part of it now, is just organizing and putting it together so people can get the information they need at their fingertips. And it's such an ongoing stream, keeping it relevant and in the moment is kind of become the bigger part of the battle. And then at the same time, as an analyst, you're trying to analyze and give your opinion on it as well.
Absolutely. I think, perfect segue, because it is such almost like an overload at times with how much you have available in terms of not just stats and information, but tools you can use and all. It's crazy how huge it's become. We all love the game, so it's not that shocking, but it is insane how it's evolved in that sense. So is there, at times it seems like there's so much, it's like, how do you kind of sift through the noise versus what's actually important? What's some of the stuff you prioritize when you're collecting that information to then present to your viewers and listeners?
So one of the things I've learned over the course of the last 1,000 years is, like, what you find out in September is the things that were being said in February, even as early as the scouting combine, is what strikes me. Is you start really, where every coach and GM talks, might be like the one time a year they all tell the truth, it seems. And they kind of like at least, flash their cards at you, and you kind of get an understanding of where they're heading. And then what you do is you spend the rest of the offseason measuring what they said versus what's happening. Mm-hmm. And you have multiple in a normal offseason, not this offseason. This is not a normal offseason.
Yes.
But in the normal offseason, you get all the little pieces of information. And I just think of it as a big timeline of data, right? And you're just plugging in the pieces. So, the way you try to organize it is anyone can jump in the middle of the timeline and kind of see where things are going, because you're always going back to that initial, data point and then comparing everything to that. And I think that's the big thing, comparing the differential between what you think they want to do versus what they're doing, and then being ready to divorce yourself from your narrative, because we all create, our narratives going into a season. And I think the most successful fantasy owners are able to divorce themselves from that narrative. And the way you do that is you follow that line of information throughout the offseason. And wherever you jump in, just be prepared to see how it changes or not and make your adjustments accordingly.
Absolutely. I'd love paying attention to every report. I mean, you got to find the nuggets, right, and see which ones the actions actually are backing them up. It's a huge point because there's so many. They're going to say every player's in the best shape of their career, or this player's about to see a bigger workload, and then the preseason rolls through and they're not really getting worked in. It's absolutely crucial to be able to sift through like that. Are there any types of, whether I guess it leads to this kind of debate in a way that it seems, especially on Twitter, as you mentioned, the fire hose, it's either analytics or it's film. I don't know. Do you stand more so on one end versus the other? And if so, is there anything you kind of prioritize, a source of those analytics or film?
Because my first job is first and foremost gathering the information and organizing it. And part of that is, understanding what is, the best shape of the career, all the trophy things and stuff like that, it's best to ignore. And that's why I try to measure what I know against what I see happening, or what my expectations are against what I see happening. And it kind of helps me separate a little bit of that, the more useless information, or keeps me on point. Look, there's a lot of people out there who do great work in the analytics and in the film world, and I try to listen to parts of all of that. Mm-hmm. But like everything else, it's just I talk about that data timeline, right? And I say, we just plug in pieces of information. When you look at it like that, no one piece of information should be defining anything. And you can see every year how one bit of news from a beat writer, like, oh, this guy looks like he's getting an increase. Don't look at any one thing of those kind of things and make an assumption based on that. Look at it in the context of the timeline and in your expectations and where things are heading and what compared to what happened here, and here. The same with the analytics and film guide. That all fits into your data timeline. It's just one piece of data. It's not definitive. Nothing is, definitive. The whole is definitive. And even then, everything you think it's defined can totally go off the rails 1 week into the season. So, that's part of the fun of the game, right? But when the analytics guys are amazing, how far that's come over the course of the last, even in recent seasons. And I love it. I love listening to it. I pay attention to it, but I use it in that context. It's one piece of many pieces of information. And the same with the film guys. Look, you could sit there, according to film guys, and spend a lot of time watching film. And I just don't have that time to do that. So I try to digest what they're doing and try and find the key pieces that maybe add a little something to what I'm already looking at, or maybe help me, step away from a narrative I'm buying into. Like, oh, maybe that's not really what I should be looking at. And so I think those are the things. They're pieces. They're input into the data timeline, but they're not in and of themselves definitive or the total story.
Absolutely. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts type of, there's so many moving parts. We have to figure out how they all come together here. Yeah.
Right. And I think when you're into any one aspect of it, and this is not to be critical, because there's a need for this, but you see everything, you're a hammer and everything's a nail, right? So if you're an analytics guy, analytics maybe is everything. Or if you're a film study guy, that's your focus. That's all you see. That's what you're looking at. So I think it's really helpful to be able to step back, take all that information in, and kind of sort it out based on the things you're already looking at. And does it support or take away, detract from the things you believe?
Absolutely. And in terms of just straight up tools, whether it's, apps or different things, is there anything, whether it's from football diehards or any other sites that you kind of consider game changers that you regularly utilize?
Yeah, I've used a lot of the things on our site. The mock draft simulator, I think, is really helpful. Oh, yeah. Doing fast mocks. It's also, I still think best ball is a pretty good laboratory because there's a little money on the line, and you can kind of get a feel for things, and not a huge difference, at least in the early rounds, between best ball and what you're doing in a regular draft. So look, I think, ADP, and I look at a bunch of different ADPs, including from my site, but I look at other sites as well. I use the Fantasy Pros consensus of experts kind of picks just to, as a sanity check on my own picks. I think there's a lot of things like that I use. Pro Football Focus is a tool, many tools that many of us use. Roto has a great array of weaponry there available to dig in as deep as you want. And I think those are the kind of things that you would probably catch me using at various times.
Absolutely. And the last question before we dig into these overprices or guys we're kind of avoiding at their cost is, are there any other analysts that you kind of look up to as wolves, whether they're big names, smaller guys? Is there anyone else that our listeners must make sure they're following?
So like during, the course of the season, I'm very busy and I'm doing my own thing. So it's not like I spend a lot of time looking at other people, but I do look at other people. And some of them are Mike Clay at ESPN, who to me is one of the sharpest guys in the business. JJ Zachariason, I pay a lot of attention to. A lot of it is I consume in the form of podcasts, as I'm sure anyone listening to this is probably out there doing as well. And I think that's a good way for me to do it because I can listen while I'm working. And so there are a handful out there that I really enjoy, and some of the personalities I really enjoy. But just in terms of the straight up information that I like to glean, people like Clay and JJ, I think are at the top of that heap for me.
Absolutely. And I guess one other question I just kind of want to work in here a little off script, though, is I think you have more experience with the fantasy game than pretty much anyone I know or have interviewed, and anyone that's probably listening to this podcast. If you had like one single tip of all the years you've played fantasy, what would it be if you had one you had to give? I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
No, not really. This is the corniest thing, but it's the truest thing. And I mean, people, it's so easy to overlook. Don't draft last year's best team. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, that's, how many people just show up at a draft and they're not drafting based on projections or what they're seeing going forward. They're based on where the guys finished last year. Don't do that. That's all.
Absolutely. And I love that your process starts in February, so it's very clear you stick to that every year by reading those combine notes and everything. It's fantastic advice, absolutely. And now let's move into the feature here, where we're going to talk about crucial. It's never the sexiest topic. Everyone likes to pick up who's going to blow up and who's going to go off this next year, and it always looks nice to hit that. But it's just as important to avoid the guys that are kind of overpriced and pick the right guys at that price point. It just doesn't get the same type of glory, I feel like. So I think this is a crucial topic. I'm pumped to dig into it with you today. And you sent me my list on Sunday yesterday, and my first reaction was like, wow, that's impressive, because it goes to show why you're a wolf. A lot of bold, thought-provoking takes. Many I'm going to agree with, and we can kind of elaborate on together. There's definitely a few I'm like, oh, okay, I can't wait for this conversation. This is going to be a fun one. So I'm thrilled to dive in. Yeah.
Let me stipulate first that everyone is a value at the right price, right? So any of these guys I'm saying I'm not buying, I would totally buy at the right price, right? I mean, there's no question about it. Maybe we have our 10-foot pole guys that we don't trust, wouldn't touch them with yours. But even me, when I find myself these guys that I think are on my 10-foot pole list, I'm seeing them at a certain price. I'm going, oh, damn. Here I go. Exactly.
There's always a price where you'd consider someone, but ultimately we're going to go through using Fantasy Pros ADP, who we might target instead of certain guys and why we're not targeting the guy where they're going. And I got to lead off with the one that you gave me first on the list, and I think everybody keeps calling this guy the next. When I ask in a segment we're going to do later, the No Huddle Offense, for a rapid fire name reaction, I ask the next Lamar Jackson or Mahomes if there was going to be one. I feel like so far 5 out of 5 Wolves have said Kyler Murray is the next one, but you put him on your list along with DeAndre Hopkins as guys you're just not buying at their current price point as represented. So I got to lead off with them and just get your sense of what has you kind of down on Kyler as compared to the industry right now.
Not down on Kyler, down on the price, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and so look, that's the thing. We get caught up in this. He's the next this. Well, he might be. Do I want to pay a third? So what was great about Lamar Jackson last year? You got him. Well, when I was drafting him in best balls, it was, started out in the double digits. And I think by the time the season was drawing near, he climbed to maybe an 8th round pick. And I'm still like, oh, okay, Murray, you're not getting that discount. Everyone's going in with the assumption that it's his year. We saw it with Mahomes. We saw it with Jackson. We're going to see it with Murray, and we may well. I'm just not going to see it at that price. I'm going to see other players at similar prices, and that's or at better prices. And I think that's kind of what I'm looking to do. So it's really not look. I like what Cliff Kingsbury does. I like what Kyler Murray did last year. One of the problems we mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins. It was a really good situation for DeAndre Hopkins. Now he comes in. There's more weaponry. Does he have the chance to work with Murray? And I think one of the things we've kind of hinted at. We all know this is an unusual offseason. And one of the things I'm a little worried about are the players that are moving, not getting the time in. I'm not sure the virtual OTAs are the same as spending the time. And I know some of these players are out doing, their workouts, and that's great. But it's still not, like the extended period of meetings, mini camps, and the really structured setup. I'm sure, Tom Brady will have those guys, in shape in Tampa. And I'm sure, but is he really going to have a chance to find that guy that he really hits sync with? Because what's the thing with Tom Brady? If you're a receiver, you have to be where he wants you when he wants you there, or it's not going to work. We've seen it time and time again. So I'm not saying that Kyler Murray is that same kind of player, but just think of guys going in, the expectations, and the price reflects those expectations. I think you're paying a premium on those expectations in a really unique offseason.
Absolutely. I mean, QB4, 56 overall, they're definitely buying at a pretty high ceiling, a pretty high premium here. I see the argument a lot of them make. You take a guy that looked really good as a rookie and then give him arguably the best receiver, one of the top 5 at least in the game, a guy that can help on the broken plays when he's scrambling and needs to kind of lob it up and needs someone just to come down with it. A guy that since 2017, you're tied with Tyreek Hill on TD, tied for second only behind Tyreek Hill in deep TD reception. So, I mean, he definitely brings obviously a ton to help with Kyler. Who are you kind of looking at then? So Kyler's at like kind of QB3, QB4. Are there some guys, whether it's a quarterback or just a player in those middle rounds that you're like, I'm just taking this guy no matter what? Because I'm with you. I love the Kyler narrative. If I was going to go on quarterback that early, I might. But I find myself targeting other players or even positions at that time. Is there anybody you're leaning towards?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Somebody I'm all in on is Daniel Jones, right? And so one of the things I like to do a lot, and I think on the Fantasy Pros ADP there, he's very reasonably priced right now, right?
Absolutely.
What is he, quarterback?
Like 13, 14?
Quarterback 15.
Even cheaper, yeah.
Right, even cheaper. So one of the things I'll often do is when I pick my guy, and I like last year it was Lamar Jackson, right? And so I will reach a round or two on that player, knowing it's quarterback, and I can come back and get what I'd call a steady Eddie. In this case, a guy maybe with some upside that I would grab is Matthew Stafford, who's climbed up to quarterback 13. And if you look at his first 8 games last year, you'll know why I'm interested. The supporting cast has not gotten worse. It's gotten better. I don't know if the defense has gotten better. That's a big factor in quarterbacks, is the need to throw the ball out, which they had there. So I like that pairing, but I think Daniel Jones is a guy who showed a lot. And, I mean, we're all focused on Murray. We'll see maybe Jason Garrett will be a little run heavier attack there than we saw, but still the high end games we saw from Daniel Jones were super, right?
Oh yeah.
And the mobility shouldn't be overlooked as well. I mean, that's one of the things we like in our quarterbacks is that mobility. Daniel Jones has that as well. So I just think when you looked at some of the high end performances he had last year, the 20+ point games, he had a 25+ points 4 times last year.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at the weekly average scores, that's something I like to look at with my quarterbacks. I want, guys up over 20. I think he's capable, not just him alone, but you look at the supporting cast with Saquon Barkley, Darius Slayton, an up-and-coming receiver, Sterling Shepard, a guy who they paid to be a wide receiver 1. Can he stay on the field and do that? I don't know. Same with Evan Ingram, but Golden Tate, a steady presence as well. So I just think there's a lot to like about Jones. I think given the price, it's really not a gamble, right? And so that's more the direction I'm taking and not spending that early draft capital. And I'm not opposed. Like, I've been drafting Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes in the second round of some drafts. Don't do it every draft. One of the luxuries of doing a ton of drafts is being able to experiment a little bit and getting shares of guys that maybe you wouldn't get if you were just drafting in a narrow band. But up to this point, I don't think I have any Kyler Murray because I'm waiting a little after. I'm seeing Dak Prescott go a little bit later. I would be fine with him if I still want to draft early. You look at last year's finish was really solid. They add weapons for him this year. Mike McCarthy comes in, a new fresh outlook on that offense, maybe similar offense, similar language, so he doesn't have to learn a lot of new things. So those are the kind of things I'm looking at a little more. I just think Murray, as much as I like him, as much as I see the upside, As much as I see the cast around him, I see a lot of things everyone else sees. I just think the price is not right for me.
Absolutely. I see all those points completely, as much as I do like Murray too. I mean, if I'm going to invest that high of a pick, which like you, I'd rather go late, the opportunity cost of passing up on a wide receiver. There's like, the Terry McLaurins or the,
Right.
Lots of impressive DK Metcalf, sometimes even falling to that Kyler Murray range. I'd love to take that. And then, as you mentioned, Daniel Jones has the upside. He had more 25-point games than Kyler Murray, more 30-point games than anybody other than Lamar Jackson. So I get your points totally. Going in at quarterback that early, I might want something a little more proven, like a Dak, if I was going to go in that same price range. I love the CeeDee Lamb edition, so I totally see that. As well as maybe even Russell Wilson, I see falling after Kyler, a guy who has all the upside in the world, has been the QB1 many times in his career. And what if they just open that offense? I'm with you. I'm a little bit lower on Kyler than I guess the industry in that sense. I totally see the narrative for him to blow up. But I'm going to probably take a wide receiver in that range anyways. And if I was going to go on a QB, I'm with you. I'd probably go for something a little more proven. So I like it. I see that point as well. You brought up Brady too, especially with the offseason and how he hasn't had the time to kind of mesh with these weapons. And for somebody that's so based on precision and I need you here, which when I expect you're not going to see it, you kind of see that as an issue. He's currently going as the QB 12, 106 overall. So kind of a guy you can wait on into that Daniel Jones range, but you find yourself going Danny Jones over Tommy, or what's your kind of thoughts on Brady going into the year?
I'm kind of hoping that Brady goes off before I grab Jones, just because I feel better about myself.
Yeah,
I don't want to get, again, I try to avoid the narrative plays, right? And I mean, I know Tom Brady leaving New England for Tampa is a big deal. We know Bruce Arians. I mean, are they really this? Is that how ideal of a fit is that? I mean, I have a lot of questions about it. I don't want to be dismissive of it. I'm just not going to, there's other directions I'm looking. And look, I'm not saying Tom Brady can't get on the same page with receivers quickly, especially good receivers. According to Antonio Brown, it can happen in like a week. Yeah. Right? So maybe that was Miami. Playing against Miami helped that cause a little bit. But still, look, he's got great weapons there. We all know what our expectations are for Chris Godwin based on last year. Mike Evans based on the broader body. Gronk coming back. I still have some questions, man. I remain a little skeptical. And if there's guys I like that are still a little bit cheaper, I'm going to go ahead and go with that. I feel more comfortable with Matthew Stafford than Tom Brady in that same range. So I'll probably not have a lot of shares of Brady. And again, part of it is the move in the unique offseason. Not that Tom Brady is slowing anything down in the private workouts, but,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the big thing will come down to, as you said, is how good of a fit will this be in the Bruce Arians kind of no risk it, no biscuit offense. It's been top 3 in air yards for as long as Arians has been calling plays, no matter who's at QB. So how much is he going to work with Brady, who's been so much of a dink and dunk type of guy? He certainly has had a strong arm, and we've seen it through many years of his career, but definitely as a New England fan, these last couple, does he still have the juice to really uncork it for all those times that Arians is going to chuck it? I'm willing to take the risk at that price and find out because of all those things you said, the weapons, but it'll be interesting to see. What were we going to add?
I'll have to check, but, it is worth noting, if, you were jumping into the analytics, Pro Football Focus noted that, Jameis Winston was, the bulk of his passes were the 10 to 20-yard range. So it's not like he was bombing out all the time. Some of these guys are more than capable of making plays with their legs. So, I'm not totally bailing on this, and I see the possibilities. I find it intriguing. But again, maybe it's almost as much the fact that it's a move, especially after 20 years. Maybe the joy of the game comes back to him. I will want some shares of this, but it's not what I'm out there. I'm not going into draft saying, man, I got to have this.
Yeah, I gotcha. I do like the Stafford call-out, too. I personally have Brady a little higher on my rankings, but I think he's a great guy that's getting very underappreciated right now for all the reasons you cited. My personal pick at overpriced, and I don't know if you'll agree with me or not here, but that's Aaron Rodgers right now, going as the QB 8, around 77 overall. One, I like all the guys we've talked about a lot better, including Stafford. I just don't see it happening for him. He was so inconsistent last year. I mean, only 5 QB 12 weeks, so top 12 QB1 necessarily, and then 5 games under 15 points, including 4 under 13, just because of how run heavy they got under LaFleur. And there's going to be weeks where Aaron Jones or whoever the goal line back, we're going to talk about Jones in a little bit, just pounds it in. It seems to be more of his memo, whereas McCarthy, he was only outside the top 10 in passing yards and top 5 in passing touchdowns once in 9 years together, in both categories, and when they had full seasons together at least. So to me, it definitely seemed like a schematic switch. They only draft a backup quarterback and running back and don't give him any help. I just didn't like anything about this offseason for him, and I don't see any reason why he's going as high as he is. Am I wrong here? What do you think about Aaron Rodgers?
Oh, I don't know. I'm starting to feel like he's moving down to the territory where I'm going to start wanting to buy some pieces of that. And that's what happens to me. It's like I sit there and I see a trend, and when I see someone dropping or something, I'm going, oh, it's not like he can't throw. It's not like that's not a good team. They were, gave away from the Super Bowl last year. The problem for me with him is the associated weaponry, right? And you're right about LaFleur. It does seem to be focused a little more on the run, had added another weapon in the ground game. So and did not add a lot of weaponry in the passing attack. Devin Funchess, God bless him. God bless him. And maybe Jay Sternberger emerges, and that seems possible as well. Maybe we'll talk about some of the tight ends later, but I just think at this point, Davante Adams is great. If I want a share of Aaron Rodgers, I'll take the Davante Adams share.
Right.
And pay the premium on that because he is kind of the only game in town. Al Lazard seems like a great play too, but as the wide receiver 2 in that offense, at the cheap price he's going at, I kind of like that. And that's something maybe we'll talk about a little bit is, a lot of these guys that you see, there's 2 components in an offense. Being old and mean and cheap and everything, I'll go the cheaper piece, right? But in this case, though, Davante Adams seems like if you want that if you want to share the Packer passing attack, that's probably the share I'm going to get. I may end up with some Rodgers as the price gets cheaper, but I'm kind of with you. I'm kind of feeling not great about him.
Absolutely. I mean, when he's going right now around Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, we mentioned Brady, which is, for some reasons, as you said, could be justifiable. But the guy I find myself going no matter what would be either Brees or I love Carson Wentz right at that same price point. I mean, the guy was a QB8 with no wide receivers going over 500 yards last year. You give him Jalen Reagor, a healthy Deshaun Jackson, plus Miles Sanders due for that breakout season, the tight ends. I just love everything about Wentz's setup this year. I think he's going to truly light it up. So if I'm again, I still, the original philosophy we talked about, the Danny Jones is the Matt Staffords, I find myself going for my QB in those 10, 11, 12 round ranges anyways. So I'm kind of avoiding most of these quarterbacks we're talking about. But if it was a QB in that Rodgers range, I think it's Wentz is the one that I find myself going at the most.
I wouldn't argue that.
The running back position, that's the one we had kind of the most listed, and that doesn't really surprise me because it is often the most polarizing, the most year-to-year variance, so it kind of makes sense to highlight who we think could be avoids at running back because as variant as it is, it's also probably the most crucial position in fantasy because of that variance. And I loved a lot of the ones you listed. There's certainly a couple I'd love to discuss further. One we're in agreement, though, at the top of the draft, the one that's drafted the highest is Aaron Jones, running back 11, 15 overall. Why do you kind of consider him an ADP avoid at the price point right now?
Oh, because 19 touchdowns. I mean, that's not going to be my expectation again, right? And I mean, look, he may, but at the price point, there may be other guys I like that I see maybe a little more upside. Look, you could say, if you look at that first round, I could find something wrong with pretty much everybody, right? And well, not everybody. Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, I think. And look, but you can start hitting Dalvin Cook territory. You can start chiseling away pretty easily at all these guys. And I think in Jones' case, it's super easy to chisel because it's just that touchdown regression is coming. Just like, for Alvin Kamara, it's going to go the other way, right? I mean, the expectation is there. And so that's my problem. The additional bodies are a bit of a concern. Look, Jones is going into the contract or is entering his contract year. He has something to play for. I think the fact that Green Bay is out there adding to their inventory at the position, though, is an indication of that future payday, either not being as big as he wants or being somewhere else. And so I just don't have a great deal of confidence in him, reaching those same numbers. Look, I think the workload's been there up to, recent seasons. If you worship at the church of yards per carry, he's been the guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it was a little less so. So maybe that's a bit of a concern for me as well. So, look, great player. like the mostly clear path to workload, but at some point there's going to be people nibbling on it, and people like A.J. Dillon and Jamal Williams is not going anywhere.
100%. I mean, to just illustrate how ridiculous the 19 TDs were, that was 36% of his fantasy value. So even if they added nobody, he's going to come down to earth a little bit in that factor. And then you add A.J. Dillon, you just mentioned. I mean, a guy that's lauded as Derrick Henry comparisons, a monster. If they give him the goal line carries, what's going to happen to that touchdown share? So I totally agree with all that. I love the player beyond all belief. I hope he does eventually get a true, every down role. I just don't see it happening when he could only top 60% of the snaps one time in a game where both him and Jamal Williams were active, and now you add a third guy that could be just as good. I don't see it happening this year, especially if that becomes a three-headed nightmare, which you talk about February, right? They were talking about adding a guy in February, and they go and do it in the second round with great needs. I think that's a great, illustration of how the coaching speak was actually matching their actions too. So yeah,
I mentioned that yards per carry. I mean, it fell off in like a yard. So those 5.5, 5.6 yards per carry season, that catches my attention, as does the drop off look. I don't think the workload is going to be diminished so greatly that's the huge concern, but the touchdowns definitely are for me.
Absolutely. And the next one up, the highest in terms of ADP after Aaron Jones you had on the list was Austin Ekeler, which is a guy I find myself taking over Aaron Jones every time. And I like Austin Ekeler, so I'm intrigued to hear kind of what has you avoiding him at this cost, and who might you be going after instead of him?
Well, so look, I'll go after him, right? It's not like I'm totally avoiding him. I'll have some shares of him, but I'm mindful of the fact that, again, I'm not looking to draft last year's best team, especially when last year's best team one of them lost their quarterback, who the great degree of his value came as a receiver, right? Does Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert come in and lock on to Austin Ekeler the same way that they did in the past? So I think that's my main concern. There are changes in that organization. They're taking a little bit of a new philosophy. Anthony Lynn is a former running back who likes that run-heavy approach. Is Ekeler the guy to really, forward that? I don't know. So, I mean, there's just enough questions in there for me. Again, I'm not avoiding him. I'll take shares of him if I feel like, okay. But I think we should dial back expectations a little bit. I think the touches last year, he had 270 touches last year. It's a hell of a lot of production for 270 touches, man. He needs more touches, and I don't know if he'll get them.
I think the biggest concern you highlighted is very real. Was this a product of Phillip Rivers, how much receiving work he saw? And there's plenty of stats that suggest whether it was, top 3 in backfield targets year, right in a row like that. Rivers definitely does love to check down and loved using his running back, so that makes me nervous. I do still just look at how great he was without Melvin Gordon, and now Melvin Gordon's removed. I mean, only Christian McCaffrey had more points over those first 4 weeks. And, Austin Ekeler I'm looking at it right now, 75%, 73%, 65, 70% of the snaps. So he was pretty much an every down back, 18, 23, 16, 23 touches without anybody else even touching 10 in that time span. And, I mean, he just absolutely lit it up on that workload. So if he gets the workload, I just don't see how he doesn't explode. But they did draft, Kelly. So is that going to become a little more of a three-headed monster? They talked a lot about having him in the slot where they bring other guys in, so it is a concern. Their actions last year said otherwise when they still had Justin Jackson, who they keep talking up on the roster. So to me, the fact that he was a top 10 guy even with Gordon there, and then he was the number 2 guy when he wasn't there, I'm hoping that all that efficiency carries over, even if the workload drops a little bit without Rivers. I still love him in round 2, especially as my running back 2. If I've gone a bell cow and I can get him as my second guy, I love it.
those are the cases where I get it, and I think probably, like a lot of people, I'm out there, I'm not averse to hammering 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds if it happens that way, and I'll have leagues like that. And you were right on the first 4 games to average over 27 points a game. So, it's, the upside is there. I totally get it. I just wonder, Anthony Lynn's already talked about, the 15 to 20 touches being the, kind of the lane they're looking for, and how many weeks is it towards the lower end of that? I don't know. So, that's where I'm. So here's a phrase I will use a lot: clear path to workload. Right? Mm-hmm. I like the clearest path to workload. Ekeler does not have the clearest path. It's a clear path, But I mean, in that range of players that he's sitting in, is it the clearest?
Absolutely. That round 2 running back too. There's so many interesting guys in that range. I do lean towards Ekeler over most. I personally, though, the one guy I always end up going with if he's there and Eckler's there as well would be Kenyon Drake. I don't know if you like Drake. I know Sanders is often there a lot. Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs is often there. Is there like a round 2? Sometimes Nick Chubb's even fallen to round 2, which I would never pass him up if he's there. Is there any kind of running back in round 2 you feel yourself targeting more over Ekeler?
Yeah, so it's kind of become Drake. Look, I don't have the greatest amount of trust in him either.
Yeah.
But I think the path to workload's a little clearer. I think also, though, conversely, Chase Edmonds is a guy that I feel like I'd like to have on those same rosters, right?
Mm-hmm.
A guy that get almost for free, who I think has a ton of upside if he gets the chance to play. So, and Miles Sanders, for whatever reason, I have the blind spot. Maybe it's the committee approach that's always there. I think I need to cure the blind spot because it was phenomenal down the stretch last season, but he was kind of the only guy there, right? He was the only game in town. But I was impressed with some of his explosive speed and his big playability is pretty appealing. We'll just, I'm hoping that carries over even with all the pieces or more of the pieces in place in that offense. So that's a little bit concerned. But I think both those guys have a ton of upside. Look, I'm drafting Jonathan Taylor in the second round without fear, or maybe with less fear than I should have. and I'm big on Chris Carson, but I'm getting him a little later, and that's great too. But I'm a huge Chris Carson proponent this summer.
I find myself going Chris Carson a lot, especially after last year. What a monster in the round, like late 3, early 4. I'd take him over the next guy we have on our list here that we're definitely in agreement more, certainly more than Ekeler. That's Leonard Fournette. He's kind of going as the running back 17, 31 overall. So early 3rd, late 2nd type of guy. I just don't see it at all right now. I have some huge concerns with his target regression. There's no way he sees that, especially with Chris Thompson now coming in there, who has that history with Gruden. Is there anything in addition to the target regression that has you concerned, or is that your biggest concern as well?
That's a huge concern for me, and you're right. There's not going to be 100 targets. There's not going to be 76 catches. Jay Gruden is familiar with Chris Thompson, who's had some great success working with Gruden when he's healthy, and that's a big caveat for him as well. And we can say a little bit the same for Fournette. I don't feel like the team is bought into him, right? I don't feel like they're 100% on board with Fournette. Yeah. Not that they didn't pick up the option. That's not, the main reason. It's just over the course of time. I mean, he gets a heavy workload. I like that. I think he'll score more than 3 touchdowns, honestly. I mean, almost by accident. I think he'll score more than 3 touchdowns. But this is a little bit different of an offense. They're making changes. There's some additional personnel. I don't know. I don't have a level of trust. I like the workload, but I'm a little worried about the loss receiving. I think you're paying a little bit of a premium based on last year's receptions.
I think I love that you brought up the organization too, because that goes at one of 2 ways, and I see it going the negative way. It could be like, we have one more year, let's ride the hell out of him, and the ceiling's huge, or it could be just, let's see what else we have, because we're going to be without him next year, and they slowly phase him out. If it goes the first way, he'll probably have a higher ceiling than we're projecting him for, but the fact that they were so urgent trying to get rid of him at draft day, and they couldn't, it seemed like.
And what's the possibility that this October that we're talking about this again, a possible trade, and not knowing what direction that'll go. That I was going to throw that in, but I kind of said I'm getting a little far in front of myself. But you're right on one aspect, and it's the thing that I like about Todd Gurley this year. That he's on a 1-year deal, and the run the wheels off factor seems like it's going to be in play. Falcons making a push. I don't know if the Jaguars are making a push for anything.
100%. I think Gurley brings a lot more upside to the table at a very similar price point going after Fournette right now in drafts. So I think he's a definite guy. Or you just wait and get a guy like Carson and some of these other guys we've talked about. Another one we also are avoiding at their cost, I totally agree with this one, was Devin Singletary going as the 24th running back, 47 overall. It looked like he was ready to be unleashed after no free agents come there. Then they go and add Zach Moss. So do you expect him to be a little bit shackled again, kind of like what Gore was doing because of Moss? Is there other factors as well, too, that you have a little down on Singletary at cost right now?
I think he might be the same guy, right? I mean, and that's not great because, even when he was getting the touches last year, he wasn't especially productive, right? I mean, he was getting, solid touches down the stretch last season. He was still finishing outside the top 20 on a week-to-week basis. So that's a bit of a concern for me. Then, the team's, ambivalence, I guess I'll go towards him, handling a featured role, which they, bore out with the selection of Moss, who may be a pretty good back at this level as well. So, just not a lot I like about the backfield right now, not named Josh Allen, who's probably the best running back on the roster.
I was just going to say the ultimate vulture, and it's not even a running back. Josh Allen, the first quarterback touchdowns last year and this year, 9 and 8. Like, that's the most brutal. And Frank Gore had 18 goal line carries to Devin Singletary's 3 last year. And that was with Gore repeatedly just not getting it in. He didn't even have a ton of touchdowns, and they still kept going back to him. So I totally agree. It suggests the team does not view him as that true feature back, especially in the most important for fantasy department, touchdowns. And Moss is just a bowling ball. Like,
right, they didn't even give him the ball. I don't know. I'm sure he had well under 5 carries. I should look before I say. He did not get a lot of carries inside the 5-yard line.
He had three inside the 10-yard line. Yeah, so it was terrible. He even had less percent of the rushing share. He had the targets, and he's still going to see those. And obviously, targets are valuable. He does some interesting thing when he gets the ball, but like without those touchdowns, it's going to be hard to come by with Josh Allen vulturing, and now Zach Moss pegged for that 170 or so touches that Frank Gore had. Probably a better version of that at this stage of their career. We'll see. I totally agree with all that. Like, yes, I like Singletary, the player, but the team is clearly not committed to him in that 3-down role at that price range. There's still great receivers. All the guys we talked about earlier, Terry McLaurin or DK Metcalf. Sometimes A.J. Brown falls to that point. Like, there's so much upside. I'd rather have the 3 running backs hammered out and not have to worry about that kind of tier than have to deal with the Singletaries or another guy that's on this list that is very polarizing these days, Raheem Mostert, the running back, 22, 65 overall. I've seen a lot of Twitter debates going off these days. It's pro Mostert camps, there's non-Mostert camps. I find myself leaning more towards the pro side, so I'd love to hear the take that's kind of having you avoid him at his cost.
Well, I think first of all, the cost is not crazy, right? Let's just stipulate it. And so again, this maybe goes back to one of my theories, especially in best ball, maybe more in best ball, but where if there are 2 guys, that I kind of like, okay, I'm just going the cheaper one. And I mean, look, Tevin Coleman was the favored guy going into the season last year. Ankle sprain messed him up. I know Matt Breida's gone. Maybe Jerick McKinnon comes back. Maybe we finally see what they loved about him as a receiving back, and it dilutes everybody's value to some degree. But that's the problem, that I'm sitting here having this conversation in my mind about, what the kind of shenanigans Shanahan will come up with. And one thing that sticks in my mind, and it's funny because it never really came to fruition last year. Maybe I should pay more attention to that. But, as the season wore down, on my Sirius show, every week we have various beat writers on. Every 49ers beat writer we had on would say the same thing, is Mostert the real deal? Well, he looks like the real deal, but man, this is what Shanahan does. He sets you up and then he okey-dokes. They're all expecting the okey-doke from Shanahan. And maybe I'm still expecting that. Maybe I'll miss out because of it. I did think he looked great. I had him on my show last year, and he seemed like a really great guy, has head on, and, look, when you go through the things that he's gone through to get where he is, the multiple teams and the special teams for years and things like that, and we know running back is the position where this can happen. But, man, I just, if I'm paying for a piece of that offense, I'm probably paying, or, the piece of that offense, I'm paying a little cheaper price. I'll go with Coleman and hope for the best. Not avoiding Mostert. Just I'm usually drafting something else. I'm either I got my running backs earlier, and I don't want to pay that price for like my 4th back, or I'm drafting the wide receivers then, and so.
Absolutely, yeah. I get all that too. I often, similar to you, my running backs are taken care of. A running back is the most common strategy I find myself going through. So by that point, I'm not really looking at Mostert. But if I'm still looking at a flex, I've done running back, receiver. Yeah. There is some serious upside. That's cool that you got a chance to talk to him. That must have been incredible. I saw an interesting stat using one of the Roto Viz tools, the game split apps. I want to see, if this guy gets even 9 carries, what has he done? In any game he has 9 or more touches, the average is 16 fantasy points, over 16 fantasy points per game, 267-point pace, and just 9 carries a game. And I get you can't just extrapolate that out for a season. There's obviously certain factors for that. But man, he's been so hugely efficient on the work that he has with Breida now gone. If McKinnon is that wild card, if he sneaks in and he's healthy and he's now suddenly worked in, that's going to ruin any type of Mostert argument I had. But there is the one factor I also work in is, yes, Shanahan always has these shenanigans. It's annoying, but there have been 6 out of his 12 guys have seen 280 or more touches as an OC or a head coach. So there is that slight chance he goes even 250 touches to Mostert. And if that happens, my good Lord, the guy did look like the real deal. The blocking scheme's fantastic. So it's just a matter of the work. Is Shanahan going to play those games or is he not? And
look, it's not overpriced for that, right? It's not like he's priced outrageously for that. I think it's baked into the cake. I think it's more a case that I just have more running backs. And he did. You mentioned something about his splits, but I'm looking here too. I think it was 9th with 20-plus point games, and no other 49er had one. So we'll see what happens, man. I'm not advising people not to draft him. I just don't have a heck of a lot of them at the price.
Absolutely. The last, I love all that list. Those are all the ones we kind of shared together. The running backs I have, in addition to some of the ones we agreed on, were David Montgomery, Sony, Michel, and DeAndre Swift. Montgomery, the 23rd running back, 49 overall. Sony, the 30th running back, 75 overall. And Swift going at 31, around 80 or so. Is there any of those that I've been talking about being down on them? My listeners have heard that case. Are there any of them that you kind of would go against and say, hey, maybe there is a case for this guy at that price?
Yeah, I'll make a case for all of them.
I like it.
But I don't like but that goes back to somebody I said before. I mean, Sony Michel is totally on my 10-foot pole list. I want to touch him. But then I get to a point in the draft where I'm going, God, is he still there? He's at least got a reasonably good path for workload. And look, all this is pre-Cam Newton, so maybe the thinking needs to change a little bit. But, you were thinking, if you're trying to make excuses for it, and look, he didn't have – I don't think he had 100 yards once last year, right?
So inefficient.
Right. But, he also didn't have, they missed Gronk as a blocker. And there were injuries along the offensive line. They lost their fullback early on. They've got a new fullback in there. Maybe, I was thinking if it's Jarrett Stidham, maybe the run-heavy approach, play defense. That's it. So I'll probably rethink that a little bit. And it was horrible, right? It was horrible last year. And so those are kind of things like every year, one of the things I do right after the season is I look at guys who just totally disappointed everybody. And I try to come up with good reasons why they might undisappoint this year. And so I just threw all those out there with Michel, which is maybe there's better blocking, maybe there's more run focus. That's the best I could come up with. I think for Montgomery, I could come up with a little more. And I think he's growing on me. The thing I like about him is there's a pretty clear path to workload. I know they like Tariq Cohen. I know they would like to get him more action, yet still we don't see the kind of Tariq Cohen cutting in. They just need to block better. They need to play better offense. I think Montgomery would be a viable play. I don't have a lot of shares of him. I've just acquired some recently, again, mostly because I'm getting running backs earlier. But the price is starting to look a little more appealing to me. At this point. And Swift, I'm not in on at all. I'm not in on any of the Detroit running backs at this point because probably I want to forward my narrative that Matthew Stafford is going to throw the ball every single snap.
I love it. I think the argument you made with Coleman and Mostert applies a lot to me with Sony Michel and now Damian Harris, where especially with that foot surgery, it's not meant to be a huge procedure. He's expected to be back, but it's still a little bit of a concern. The only time I side with the more expensive guy in an unclear backfield is when I really love the talent. Like Mostert, I just loved what I saw last year. I loved the fit in the zone blocking scheme. I don't look at Michel and think I see anything special. He gets what's blocked, and that's about it. So to me, I'm going to go with the cheaper guy. I'm going to go with the Damian Harris. Hope all that stuff improves and that he maybe just takes over and has one of those like LeGarrette Blount out of nowhere seasons for the Pats.
Entirely possible. And look, I think I'm still a little stuck on that late season run for Michel. Right, yeah. That's kind of still in the back of my head, and that's why I'm trying to put him on my do not touch list. But I'm still, I'm putting him there, so please stay away because I feel like I'm drawn to him still based on that 2 years ago level
That
of work.
Super Bowl run, oh my God, yeah, that was insane what he was doing in the playoffs for us, for the Patriots there, yeah. So that covers all the running backs, and we only have a handful of receivers and tight ends to get through, and I like the name. I'm intrigued by the one you put up to start here, Amari Cooper, the wide receiver 9, going right around the end of the second round here, 24 overall in ADP's price, Fantasy Pros ADP. The Cowboys did rank first last year in passing yards, but you're still down on their expected number 1, at least, Amari Cooper at that price. Why is that, and kind of who are you looking at instead?
Look, he's not horrible again, right?
Yeah.
Not horrible at all. But he disappeared at times. I think he had the 20-plus or 22-plus in 3 of the first 5. But he only had 2 more 20-point games over the course of the year. And I think in some of the biggest games, why is he on the sidelines at a critical time, right? So maybe that's just stuck in my head. The addition of CeeDee Lamb, a great playmaking receiver, is a bit of a concern. I mean, he's going to make some plays. I don't know if he's going to take all Cooper's plays away. That's not my argument here. Just when I'm drafting a wide receiver that high, I would like to think that he's like a true alpha number 1. And we've seen Cooper be that at times, but does he ever extend it beyond a stretch of games, right? Have we seen that full season? And I think that's maybe a little bit my concern with him.
I think a lot of last year, too, came down to another big concern with him is the injury risk. It seemed like all those big games early on, week 8, he has that knee injury against the Giants, and maybe that was part of why it tapered off. But I want to be able to that was the reason, and now he's guaranteed a 16-game slate where he's fully healthy, but that's not the case. He's always dinged up, so that certainly has to be baked into his price. I am attracted. Sorry, you go first.
There are some guys in that range. I mean, Kenny Golladay really appeals to me. I think he's top 5 capable guy that I can draft in that same range. Adam Thielen maybe a little less. Allen Robinson I'm big on. DK Metcalf, I like him. I think you mentioned him a couple times. I like him a hell of a lot. I thought, coming off that really impressive rookie season for a guy who can't run routes, he looks pretty damn good, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The one thing I do like about Cooper, I like a lot of those names you shout out even more than him too, so I find myself avoiding him. DJ Moore is the one if I'm going to wide receiver at that range, that's the one I kind of hammer, especially over Cooper. But I like the just vision, and who knows if it will translate that way, of Mike McCarthy, the Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, like that Alpha X. Even when he's had good guys like Cobb and other ones on the side, there always does seem to be that one kind of main vein, and I don't know if he'll carry that over this year. A lot of the concern of CeeDee Lamb and Gallup is very real, 2 very good talents. So will he ever be that true alpha? And if he's not, then why would you take the most expensive one? So I totally get that case. I'm hoping for his sake, if I own him at least, that he does kind of carve out that Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams role. He certainly can run all the full route tree when he's healthy to be able to pull that off, but the health, the inconsistencies, the targets around him, I totally get the argument to why to avoid him, especially with such interesting wide receivers that we just shouted out. And there's still bell cows you can get if you're going to go that running back. There's still Melvin Gordon's often sitting there, some intriguing players. So I feel like we're agreeing on a lot of these, which is nice, even though there's points to make for both sides. The other guys I'm down on, and I don't know if you have a strong argument for any of them, would be Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver 15, 45 overall. I just don't find myself taking any shares right now. Stephon Diggs as well at wide receiver 21, 54 overall. And then Gallup, I think he's the one that gets more hurt by Lamb than necessarily Cooper. So those are guys, he's wide receiver 31, 68, that I find myself also kind of avoiding right now. Is there any of those that you either agree strongly or disagree strongly with?
Yeah, I'd agree with you on Diggs, and that's another classic case where I'm taking the cheaper component. Also, my John Brown addiction knows no bounds. Player I will never quit on.
All about him. Yes, love it.
Right, and so and I just think as you get down to that next range, there's a hell of a lot of guys. If I'm drafting a running back there, that I feel great with. And even if not great, the upside is there, and the price is a little better with the Cortland Suttons, the Devontae Parkers. Look, it wasn't a big sample that we have to hang our hat on, but I do like some of the indications from Parker with the new coaching staff 100%. That maybe he flipped the switch. And you mentioned Terry McLaurin. There's a lot of guys next round. Look, so a guy that I really like, Marquise Brown. And why do I like Marquise Brown? Because last year at this time, I started hearing Baltimore's coaches saying all this crazy stuff about Lamar Jackson, which is why I started investing in him. Why are they saying this about this guy? why are they saying he's going to revolutionize the way offense is played? I mean, they were really going out on a limb, right? And so I said, well, given the price is pretty good. They're saying similar things about Marquise Brown this year. Like this guy, he's going to make a huge step. He's healthy, all these things. So I think at that price, I'm ready to roll the dice on a guy like him instead of a Michael Gallup, who's going at about the same price.
I love all the names you shouted out there, and that's why I'm avoiding these guys. I love the Parker. I know, again, we've all been burned so many times. It's a tough one to get back on board, but I fully love him. I mean, the number 2 wide receiver other than Michael Thomas once Ryan Fitzpatrick took over as the full-time starter. And it was more so what my eyeballs were showing me. I mean, against Stephon Gilmore, putting him in a blender, making the contesting against one of the best, like one of the only guys I saw as a Patriots fan do that all year. He was making those alpha plays. And then a lot of people arguing, well, is Fitzmagic going to be the starter all year? I get it. If he's not, shouldn't that be a good thing? Shouldn't Tua be an upgrade if he's taken over?
Right.
So I love Parker. I get why everyone's hesitant, but at that same range as Juju, that's the guy I would totally have picked as the one. And I love Marquise Brown. I love both those names.
I feel like Juju could rebound because the bar is so low. And Ben, assuming Ben is back, but I'm with you. I don't have any shares yet. And I'm in a lot of drafts.
I think the rebound is baked into the price. Like wide receiver 15, sure, he's not going second round like he was last year, but wide receiver 15 is still pretty high. That's like a low end 1, high end 2, similar to DJ Moore's and some of again Devontae Parker. I'd rather have who goes 2 rounds later. You're buying this huge rebound from Big Ben, the entire offense. I mean, this is a guy that's just openly been admitting to like having some problems throughout the offseason, and his arm just kind of fell off in 1 week last year. And I don't want to say the guy's done. He's been fun to watch this entire career. But if his arm falls off week 1 again next year, Juju didn't show that he was QB. Whereas you see Hopkins performing with like TJ Yates, you'd hope Juju was kind of QB proof, and he just didn't prove to be that guy, which makes me nervous, especially with Deontay Johnson and some guys emerging around him. So yeah. I'm off him. I love the Devontae Parker as a guy to pivot to as a similar price point. At tight end, I love the first name. It's a bold one. Zach Ertz. I mean, the pinnacle of consistency these last 4 years. The tight end 4 in price, 35 overall. He's been 6th, 3rd, 2nd, and 4th best T in fantasy and top 4 in points per game for all of those years. So he has been as a very inconsistent position, as good as you can get. But right now, he's a little bit overpriced in your mind. What has you kind of thinking a little bit lower on Ertz this year?
So, I do like to draft tight ends early, but this year, but it's a tier of 3 again for me, right? And it ends though at Mark Andrews, and just Ertz doesn't fall into that hole. And look, guys like Darren Waller, who last year I was all over, along with Andrews, love those guys. I think this is less about Ertz and more about the pack below him, right? That are coming at a much cheaper price, even if you ignore the Tyler Higbee breakout. But guys like, Hunter Henry, I think is still a reasonable play. But even below that, Mike Gesicki was a guy who came on really strong last year. Noah Fant, I could buy into. Jared Cook is getting cheaper. He came on the second half of the season last year. So I just feel like at the prices I'm paying for those guys, I might get really good production. And I have fears of Dallas Goedert. And just a healthier general supporting cast for that offense. I'm not predicting Ertz is a bust. I'm just not liking the price I'm paying for him, and I'm going to draft other guys there. Hopefully, I have my tight end by the time he's going, and it's not a worry. But if it is, I'm going to wait till way later.
I think it's almost like you have a similar approach, and I agree with both of them, to quarterback and tight end, where if I'm not getting Kelsey or Mahomes, or if I'm not getting Lamar Jackson or even Mark Andrews at this point, I'm trying to think of the only other tight ends I might have above those guys. You got that surefire locked-in guy, or you kind of wait because there's so many intriguing late QBs and late tight ends. Jonnu Smith, another one to toss out there as a late intriguing guy. Hayden Hurst with the Falcons, is certainly an intriguing name. So I find that I'm taking a very similar approach. That's why I'm missing out. Just like as much as I like Kyler, similar to the quarterback argument, there's just I got to go for not the onesie positions. A super flex league will of course be different, but I avoid those onesie positions if I'm not getting like the alpha, the locked-in guy, and I go late at him. So I get that take. I totally understand that, and I do think Goddard's an absolute monster. There is going to be a year where he takes over for Ertz, it could be as early as this year, so why not take him 15 rounds later and then find out?
Right.
I like it. I like all that. And I totally agree with your next one. I think he might be the most overpriced tight end in fantasy football. That's Austin Hooper right now, going as the tight end 8, 89 overall. 1,000% agreement with this one. I think he's overrated in fantasy, more of a product of that Falcons offense in my eyes. So before I dive into why I'm against him, what's your take on why you think he's a little overpriced?
Well, I mean, I think you kind of mentioned the key is where he's coming from is maybe had as much, and maybe the same reason we both like Hayden Hurst is Dirk Cutter,
Exactly.
The target shares that go to the tight end dating back to Tony Gonzalez. Not that any of these guys are Tony Gonzalez, but it helps you beat Tony Gonzalez when you're getting the kind of target share that the tight end gets in his offenses. And we'll see. Kevin Stefanski makes great use of the tight ends as well. But there's a couple tight ends there, actually multiple tight ends there. So. And there's Odell Beckham, and there's Jarvis Landry, and there's Kareem Hunt, and there's a lot of pieces, including Nick Chubb, just because he'll get handoffs. But in the passing attack, there's a lot of components there. So I think the expectations that Hooper comes in and lives up to what they're paying for him leads everyone to expect that he's going to be maybe a little higher on the fantasy radar. Maybe he will. I'm just not going to pay the price to find out. I'm not going to pay the price to see if Baker Mayfield rebounds.
100%. I mean, a lot of people, when I argue that, there's all these mouths to feed. They're like, well, there's all those mouths to feed in Atlanta, too. You had Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley. Well, Atlanta threw it 45.9 times a game, most of the NFL. Minnesota was 31st with 30.9, where Stefanski comes from. So, I mean, if you have a huge aerial pie, okay, yeah, weapons, that argument doesn't hold as much water. But when you're very limited in this aerial pie, then if you're the fourth or fifth slice and you're only throwing it 30 times a game, there's going to be plenty of dud weeks. Njoku still, as you mentioned, a great athlete too. We never got any type of consistency out of Kyle Rudolph, even though Stefanski, he had plenty of touchdowns. It was just, if he didn't have a touchdown, he didn't do anything. And I kind of see that for Hooper next year, is it's going to be a touchdown or bust. And that's not a guy I'm paying tight end 8 price for. I'd rather wait and find a tight end or bust guy, touchdown or bust later on in the draft. So I'm all with you. I think it's 100% a valid argument, and I'd rather have Hayden Hurst personally than Austin Hooper because of that aerial pie he's going into now.
But even as we say this, the ADP is rising to where I'm dialing back on Hurst already. Yeah. So I think everyone's catching on to that one.
Absolutely. Alrighty, well, that wraps up all our overprices right now, the guys that we consider people not to attack where they're going, which brings us to the no huddle offense, the quick hit gut reactions, where I'm going to give you kind of 20 questions. I do this to every of the industry wolves that come on here, and you just kind of let it rip. If there's any you want to explain, feel free. You're welcome to. But otherwise, just give me the name that comes right to your mind. How's that sound?
Sounds like a good plan.
All righty. Number 1. After McCaffrey, the number 2 player in fantasy should be?
Saquon Barkley.
The next Dalvin Cook or round 2 running back who's going top 5 in 2021 will be?
Miles Sanders, if all goes right.
What's the favorite fantasy team name you've either had or seen?
So this was, you sent me the list, and I appreciate that. I'm in like 20 plus. It'll be over 30 leagues every year, and they're all industry leagues, and the names are all people in the industry. So I like my team name, Football Diehard. No, I don't even see names anymore. It's been years.
Yeah, true. Yeah, a lot of it is dependent on like your personal rivalries or like past bad blood with people, and you come at them. So I get that. Number 4, the next Chris Godwin or round 4 to 5 wide receiver who explodes into the elite will be?
Look, I think DK Metcalf is right on the verge of that.
The 2020 Mark Andrew or breakout tight end will be?
I want to say Mike Gesicki.
Who is your most hated NFL player for fantasy-specific reasons?
I'm going to go with Odell Beckham just because he, guys that kind of force their way. I don't know. It's just nothing against him. I just think, people always see the grass greener on the other side, and they get the other side and go, wow, that grass is not that green.
If there was somehow another Lamar Jackson or Pat Mahomes, it would be?
Danny Jones!
I love it. Which early rounder, first or second, is going to bust the hardest?
I'm going to go with, I'll go with, we've talked about Aaron Jones, so I'm going to not duplicate that. I mean, expecting Derrick Henry to put up the same numbers he did last year seems like a reach.
I saw my space. I think a couple people have brought him up too. Who gained the most fantasy value in the 2020 offseason?
Probably Kyler Murray. Even though I don't think he deserved, I'm not paying for it, but he did. I mean, when you add DeAndre Hopkins and you're going into your second year, the climb has been phenomenal.
Conversely, who do you think lost the most value this offseason?
Damian Williams.
I won't leave rounds 5 through 6 without
Chris Carson.
Do you ever play Settlers of Catan?
I don't even know what the hell that is. I know it. What are you talking about?
It's a random board game. I'm like 0 for 7 on that one. I guess nobody really plays it other than me. The next sophomore wide receiver after or even before A.J. Brown should be?
It should probably be Sutton, Cortland Sutton, but I'm thinking wrong.
He'd be in his year 3, right? Sutton,
right.
It's kind of like that Metcalf, McLaurin,
like
Debo.
Yeah, it's those two. Those are the two that I'm looking at is Metcalf and McLaurin. I forgot what a sophomore is. It's only been 100 years.
What do you prefer, target hogs or workhorse backs?
Workhorse backs.
Alvin Kamara, James Conner, and Ekeler were all top 5 running backs that went after round 7 in their respective years. In 2020, that'll be
J.K. Dobbins.
Ooh. What are your ideal league settings?
PPR, Superflex, maybe tight end, heavy scoring.
After Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams, owners should draft blank at wide receiver.
Probably Julio Jones.
Blank was the most important coaching move for blank players' value in fantasy.
I just did this one. I'm going to say, I want to just running through the list in my head. Some of them seem so obvious. I guess I'll go with, so Kevin Stefanski is the offensive mind, but there's so many pieces there that really help any of them. Maybe he just gets swamped out. I'm going to pass. There's too much information in my head.
Stefanski is often the one for the run game. A lot of people say Stefanski for Chubb and Hunt. Some people do Joe Brady and Matt Rule go in there for Carolina and those weapons. Those have been the 2 most common answers we've gotten on that one. What about the last 2 here, last 3? Do running backs matter?
Running backs definitely matter. But also all running backs matter because you go down, that's the thing. I mean, every year we know that a running back you didn't draft is going to win someone their title, right? And I think, being able to identify some of those guys is critical. Always.
And I don't know if this will apply to you or not. Funniest last place punishment or side bet you've kind of witnessed or been a part of?
I've never been a part of one of those. Like it's literally been 20 years since I played in leagues that weren't industry leagues. So
yeah,
I play in a couple, friendly leagues, but there's none of the betting or anything.
Gotcha.
I come up with a better coaching answer. I have to look at my notes now.
Oh, yeah.
You're probably right. I mean, if we go down to coordinator changes, maybe Pat Shurmur going to Denver and, bring him with some new explosive players. But I think beyond that, Jay Gruden, I don't know. You're probably right.
I like the Shurmur call, though, for Drew Lock. I think that, huge volume. We saw those blow-ups from Daniel Jones. So that's a good one, too. Not a lot of people bring him up. I think he's going under the radar. So I like that. And the last question here, boldest 2020 fantasy prediction, and then just kind of remind our listeners where they can kind of connect and find your work.
Chase Edmonds is the guy that nobody drafts who wins somebody their title. And, nothing against Kenyon Drake, just has yet to prove he can do it over the course of the season, and it's going to be somebody, and that's where I'll hang my hat on that one. And you can find me at footballdiehards.com or on Twitter at footballdiehard or on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. Usually 7 days a week, but it's a weird year. Who knows?
Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, your answers, all the insight you brought. Like, as I said at the top, just the chance to speak with you after reading your work for as long as I have. And you kind of, again, turned me on to the idea that a fantasy analyst could be like an actual thing in real life. I just appreciate everything and the time today. It just means a lot. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, Wolf.
Absolutely. Best of luck in your leagues this season. Talk soon.
Thanks, man.